and welcome to Gerg and Muxl, a podcast that seeks to explore the unexplored topics of games, how they work, and why we love them. I am Muxl.
I'm Gerg.
And we are here to talk more about spooky things.
We are. It's been a weird, a little bit asymmetrical month, but we're here now, and that's what matters. And this week we are going to be discussing, as well as with the upcoming stream, which will be in like an hour.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't know when you're going to put this out.
Well, yeah, probably too late for
people
to hear about this. But
anyway, we're going to be
might
streaming
catch the tail end because I'll try to get it out before we stream.
In any case, we're going to be talking about creature design and monster design today, and how it interacts with the various types of horror. As there's nothing like a good creepy monster. It's just some entire franchises just live and die on their monster.
Yeah.
Or monster movies. And it's also interesting that, so I'm talking about creature monster design as opposed to, like, a monster movie. We're not necessarily talking about monster movies.
No, we're not.
Like, a monster, we're going to include, like, Freddy Krueger.
Yeah.
Anything that's used as the primary device to cycle all of the themes, all of the abstract themes that are put into a physicality to communicate to a viewer.
Right.
Mostly thinking about movies and games. There's actually a lot of cross-pollination here as opposed to some other times.
Yeah, which was interesting. Like, there's not too much that you can say, like, this monster works in a video game but would never work in a movie.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it seems like mostly these creatures, they can be scary in both places.
Or in times that you have one that's in a game and a movie, they are virtually unchanged, right? It works in... It doesn't require a huge change.
Right.
And that's an interesting thing because historically we usually get to use movies as a contrasting point in terms of their ability to be manipulated, which they can't be as opposed to games.
Well, and I will say that point only stands because the designers of horror games do a decent job of making sure you can't break the sort of illusion of the monster.
Yeah.
Which if they let you do, then obviously no monster would work in a video game because you could just do the smart thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Which people in horror movies never do because when you're scared out of your mind, you don't do the smart thing.
And even we were just watching one of our favorite YouTubers, Video Game Donkey.
Right.
Who is quite popular, but we were just watching his Halloween clip, and there's a moment where that exactly thing happens, basically. Right. That exact thing happens where he gets exposed to the monster, and immediately it's terrifying, like legitimately. Mm-hmm. And then it begins glitching, and he's able to approach it without any fear and be able to interact with it in a way that a movie wouldn't let you do. And suddenly it loses all semblance of terror, like immediately. It's like really quick.
Yeah, it's fascinating how fast that happens.
Yeah,
check it out. It's a clip. It's like 6.5 minutes in, I think, basically on his.
Donkey's Halloween special.
Yeah.
Always a good source of entertainment. But anyway, so we're going to just break down a few of these creatures and monsters in so much as we can relate them. I think what's really clear about monsters and the reason that they seem to work so well is kind of I was alluding to earlier on, which is both movies and games are entirely visual mediums. You don't see as many monster books. Right, in general.
That's true, yeah.
At least that rely heavily on the appearance of the monster, because otherwise it's far more... I'm just even thinking, like Pennywise from It. That one works both ways in terms of its cinematic, clown is horrifying to look at. But that book existed as a movie, or it existed as a book first, I think, for at least a decade before they made the miniseries in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And obviously made it name for itself as kind of one of the best pieces of horror that had been done in the modern era. And that was entirely based on all of the ability for the reader to imagine what was happening. And the reason the Pennywise was scary was, seeing a creepy clown is really scary now. Although, in part, because of that book, actually, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Which came first, the chicken or the egg. But past that, the idea of something that would appear in different ways was the psychological horror of that particular creature as opposed to the forms it actually took. Mm-hmm. So I think with movies and with games, it does require it to be far more visual. You take all of the abstraction that a book can do kind of in the mind and the psychological aspects of it, and you just visualize it, basically. You make it concrete, and you put it in. I think that's kind of the big...
That has its pros and cons,
Yeah,
too.
It does.
The pros, obviously, for a book, you can leave it abstract, right? Yeah. Like, you can describe, 3 things about the creature that are creepy.
Or how it feels to see it. Or
exactly. So you don't have to flesh out every detail.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But, you also another problem with books is like, yeah, you can just put it down, and you aren't really, there's no sound. There's only so many senses you can engage.
Right, and I feel like too the difference between, like, because I'm thinking like, okay, two examples I can think of just for book to movie things. One is my dad, who I've never talked about on this podcast. As if there's another podcast that I have. Yeah,
there's another podcast called
my dad podcast.
Gerg's Dad.
It's just
look it up right now.
Unpublished. It's mostly just me. Anyway, no, but so my dad would talk about. He's not horribly scared by much. It seems, especially in terms of movies. But he said the Amityville Horror, when he read it, and he was just out of college when it came out or something, like deeply disturbed him, and said it was like one of the worst things. He saw the movie and it was like nothing. Now, that's partially because I think there's some level of knowing what was going to happen. The movie adaptation wasn't horribly well received, but the other part of that was trying to convey the unsettledness of the family and being able to get into their heads as kind of like, I think Paranormal Activity actually was the first movie to capture kind of this normal things happening that were just sort of slightly unsettling. It was really hard to capture visually, and I think Paranormal Activity finally did that, but that was decades later.
Right.
Point is, there wasn't a whole lot of horrible visual things that actually happened in the novel. It was just this sense of dread and this incredible invasiveness and evil that was part of the house. The other example I was thinking of is if you, because I'm a Lord of the Rings fanatic, but which scene is scarier, the Shelob scene in the movie or as written in the book? And they're vastly different scenes. I don't know if have you read the novels?
I don't remember that encounter very well.
It's actually very little direct action or contact or chase in it at all. It's this very long drawn out description of Frodo sensing that something is deeply wrong nearby, and that there's this enroaching kind of presence and oppressiveness and darkness that is, he passes a crack basically, and he knows that he senses something stir as he passes it, and he knows that there's something in there, and that it means him harm, and that it's ancient and horrifying, and so there's no, in the movie is the big huge reveal, and it's a giant spider, and then there's all the horrifying shots of a giant spider,
right?
Which makes total sense for a movie because and Tolkien talks about Shelob's description only at the very end when Sam confronts her.
Right, which makes sense.
Anyways, it's just wildly different. So I think the thing with monster design that was kind of our thesis for the episode is that, as with so many things, it really matters the type of horror and what kind of scare you're going for.
Right.
Kind of the heart of the horror itself, the creature should be the design of the monster, the creature, whatever you're using to embody that, should be in service to that type of horror.
And we talked about this a little bit last year when we did our crazy horror bonanza. Which is not what we called it, but just that there are only so many types of fear that people really experience. Right. There's very little fear that isn't sort of transferred from like core, more basic fears. Right. Like fear of death. Right. Like really obvious one.
Yep.
People have that. Certainly, there are some cultures where that's not really socialized, or it's sort of encouraged to be a good thing.
Right.
Fear of like
aloneness,
being out of control, fear of isolation is a problem.
Yep.
Things like apparently, I think snakes and loud noises, I think, are two things that we're afraid of from
evolutionarily,
birth, basically.
Yep.
But
it's always fascinating to me that snakes are scarier to us than spiders.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Like, I'm way more scared of spiders than snakes. We'll get Xander in here. He can describe why snakes are so terrifying. Xander has an intense snake phobia.
Does he?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Dude, and he's going to kill me for saying this on air, but his mom would cover up pictures of snakes in, like, his textbooks in school.
Oh, my gosh.
Like, in, like, biology, if there's, like, a picture of, like, a snake. Like,
cover it up.
Then she would have to, like, go through all of his books and, like, put Post-its on it.
Wow.
I don't say that to make fun of him. I'd say it to the severity of the level that he can't take snakes.
But even when people have phobias like fear of flying or fear of
high places,
water, fear of high places, usually that's a transfer from fear of something more core and more real.
Yeah, like core emotions, right? Like you can kind of trace complex emotions back down to like fear, anger, sadness, and joy.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So if like somebody's afraid of flying, like, there's more likely a more core fear of like losing control or being out of control.
Yeah, totally. Or agoraphobia, right? Being exposed.
Yeah, exactly. And so, anyway, all that is to say that your monster design has got to in some way tie into and frankly like the design of the whole like aesthetic that you go for in a piece of horror media has to tie back into some of these core fears.
Yeah, and I feel like it works best with the monster, like thinking about things that like rely specifically on like one monster or creature, as opposed to something that relies more on less one particular thing.
Right.
My guess is that you'd be able to see the same ideas in both of them, just in terms of what is trying to scare you, just being far more dispersed. When it's not like a creature is just like all of the things, it's just very concentrated,
right?
Like very dense in terms of theme, and all of the abstract ideals that you're basically embodying in this one thing, and it should be rather straightforward.
Yeah.
In terms of, you can look at the monster and kind of discern what's going to be happening. So let's give some examples here. I mean, the quickest and easiest. We still haven't played this, and I still want to play this. But I know it's expensive. Alien Isolation, right? Made some waves as a particularly effective horror game in a genre that was kind of not doing too hot in the past few years, I think, in terms of new, or maybe just something new or nuanced. It was kind of a lot of the same jump scare sort of stuff. And Alien Isolation was a totally different experience, and it was praised for its feelings of invoking the movie itself, the original Alien by Ridley Scott, in terms of feeling trapped and being hunted by a completely predatory, otherworldly, smart and intelligent and deadly thing, and the feeling of powerlessness that comes with that. So the interesting thing about Alien, without getting horribly graphic, was that it was designed by a dude named H.R. Geiger, who was a abstract artist, a very postmodern, I guess. Is very deconstructive of a lot of things, mostly sexuality. And he was renowned for a lot of weird crap. And Ridley Scott's a weird dude too. I don't know if you ever heard him talk, but he's a strange guy. And you can go back and kids don't probably do this without an adult, but there's the original concept art for the Alien is intensely sexual. Yeah, it very evocative of different genitals, to say the least. And so one of the themes with that whole film, and it shows up in a lot of different ways, but the theme of having this underlying kind of eroticism combined with violence is super unsettling, super deeply unsettling. There's a reason that rape is considered so deplorable,
right,
in culture, and that's because it is. Anyway, that was a way for them to tap into this very primal part of that was the whole thing. It was very much, that movie is very much about sexuality in a lot of ways. With at the time, it was in the early '80s, and having a strong female protagonist in Ellen Ripley was pretty darn uncommon. So having her, it's a movie very deeply grounded in like sexuality as a whole,
right?
And its themes and what it's saying about people and the world. That's what it's about outside of the monster, and the monster is just very clearly this one's kind of just a slap in the face in terms of level of theme.
Yeah,
there's only so many ways to hide a giant penis on your main creature.
Well, and you mentioned even the set design and how it feels very like almost like a body, almost
claustrophobic.
Yeah, claustrophobic,
rather womb-like maybe.
It references different body parts and different like. It almost seems like a living creature on its own.
Yep, being trapped in there, and so in that case, that's just a very clear thematic choice to if the core of that horror was to begin tapping into something kind of primal in the back of your head, which is like fear about sexuality or whatever that might look like. Then that's exactly what they put into the monster, which was this very evocative, and it's interesting too because obviously you look at it. And I think some people, they've toned it down. If you look at the original concept art, they toned it down a lot. Because the original concept art was not safe for work. But the final design is still... Like, I remember when I first learned about this, and I had seen the movie before that, and I was putting two and two together, and I was like, oh my lord, that is
Yeah.
So even though it seems really obvious now, it probably wasn't. I think to audiences, it probably wasn't immediately apparent. They're like, "Oh, this is about sexual horror."
Right.
You know, I think it was designed to evoke and kind of bring that out without bringing it, like, kind of subconsciously even. Mm-hmm. Which also fits with kind of this whole, you know, the horror of it like moves around the ship, right? And it moves through like air ducts, and it's always kind of hidden before it pops out and appears. So this idea of this kind of a lurking presence in the background that you never know if is there, this kind of commentary on, you know, subliminal sexuality and repression and all these different themes, really encapsulated beautifully in this creature. And even outside of its design, its life cycle, right, the way it comes about, and the very famous chest burster scene, and the way it reproduces is all very steeped in this.
Oh yeah.
So,
and like,
I think that's a pretty clear connection between theme and physical design.
Yeah, I would say so. And I mean, think about, like, one of the reasons that's disturbing is because you're mixing sexuality and, like, this really intense violence and destruction.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And, like, sexuality is supposed to lead toward procreation and, like, tenderness and, like, intimacy. And this is, like, the exact opposite.
Yeah.
This is, like, sexuality for the sake of, like, kill and destroy and, like, multiply, basically. Which is, like, the only thing it had in common was that actually it is reproduction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that's probably the most intense one we got here.
Yeah, we'll
we should have opened with a less.
With that one.
Yeah, I know. I was like, this is an obvious one.
We haven't.
Anyway, all this to say, interestingly enough, again, like the theme, the reason I think there had been another game, Alien Colonial Marines, that was widely regarded as a complete mess of a game. I think there was some levels of just it was a bad game by itself, but also I think it missed kind of the core what made the Alien franchise interesting. And the game, Isolation, again, like I was saying, really succeeded and was praised a lot for its ability to, make you feel powerless, make you feel trapped, claustrophobic, give you a lot of sense of being followed and hunted, kind of all these same themes of something lurking in the background in the darkness. And obviously a lot of that was the production, but it still all kind of fit similarly to what the movie did. In terms of, it was still effective in an interactive way. And
we touched on this last year, where we talked about things sort of being almost like they should be, but not quite, as being like really disturbing. And again, this is not even almost like it should be, but there's things that are references to like human sexuality, and yet are so incongruous with like the way that we like think they should be.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And just a twisting, a violation of something that's very intuitive and knowable,
right?
Which is, you know, sex in large part. Suddenly becoming completely
been around for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty easy to figure out. Alrighty, well, enough with the uncomfortable dad talk. Let's move on to something a little bit more knowable.
So this is the thing, right? Like, horror often deals with really intense themes.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was actually looking at our list, and I was like, crap, now we're going to talk about, like, nightmares and Hiroshima and
right. It's get ready, kids, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen.
It's October. We're not pulling any punches.
No punches. Okay, probably the tamest one on this list is Freddy Krueger. Honestly,
sure, yeah.
So the way that he's designed, right? He's marketed. You pointed this out. All of his marketing material, he's a silhouette, right? They don't show like Freddy Krueger in like full lighting with his turtleneck and everything. It is also interesting that like he can be any shape, but he chooses to return to this form where he's got knife hands and
it's weird as crap. It's very strange with the hat, the boiler hat, the big nose, the strange sweater he has on, the one knife glove. It's not two of them; it's just one. And that's like always the way that he shows up, right? It's an immediate. The second you see that silhouette, you know who you're looking at, right?
Right, but and that's like kind of the thing about shapeshifters, though. And this, I mean, we're not going to make an episode out of this, but like you want shapeshifters to have an iconic form.
Yeah, sure.
But like realistically, I don't think that a shapeshifter would necessarily like be attached to a particular form.
No, yeah, totally.
Or I don't know, maybe they would be. I don't know. Shapeshifters aren't a thing. Yeah. But it's like it's a interesting tension for the audience and for the designers to like. We have this thing; it could be anything. Yeah. But he kind of always needs to be the same thing so that people know that he's on screen.
Yeah, that's.
You can't have him be like a soda can.
It's so hard for humans to wrap their minds around. Like, we need to latch on and give something an identity so badly to something that has no physical identity. Like, we can't. Like, they do that. Like, right, Pennywise is another good example. Like, it has no straight form, but it's always going to be. Pennywise is the one that comes back to.
right?
For no apparent reason other than it's plot wise it might be slightly effective, but like I can't think of many. There's always like a true form of the thing that we need to have. That is interesting. Anyway, Freddy Krueger is another good example of that. Right? His whole thing was embodying nightmares.
Right, obviously. Which nightmares can be anything, right? So just he embodies that 1-to-1.
Yeah, exactly. That's a pretty simple one too in terms of not any huge level of analysis I think needs to happen. There's a few things they did interesting, particularly talk about if we want to talk about the intersection of sexuality and horror again. I don't know if we've ever talked about the fourth Nightmare on Elm Street, I think. Which I caught by accident one night.
That one. We have talked about
that one's all about, I don't know. Maybe we talked about it last year. Look that movie up. It was again made in the 80s, if not early to mid 80s, when sexuality, particularly homosexuality, was not a thing to be talked about. And it was basically made by a director who was gay, who wasn't out yet, and wanted to convey the horrors of being a repressed homosexual.
That's fascinating.
And so he made it's been called the gayest superhero movie of all time, or it's not superhero, horror movie in terms of it has these really really oblique. Basically, Freddy in this movie is just this boy's repressed homosexuality.
Interesting.
And there's a bunch of really clear imagery that suggests this, basically. But it couldn't be actually about that, right?
Right.
So in this case, the whole Freddy Krueger as a nightmare and as being malleable, like that one silhouette is able to represent, damn near anything.
Right.
And so that's interesting because it's not good, by the way. I'm not saying this is like a.
It's interesting
really
to me.
movie.
Like it was hard for me to think about how that would be good, right? Because we just talked about how crucial it is that the character symbolizes the horror that you're trying to convay.
Yeah, and now you have a burned man with a glove.
I know. I don't really know that Freddy Krueger symbolizes fear of like repressed sexuality.
Yeah.
Right. Like I think you probably could make a monster that symbolizes that, but I don't think like Freddy Krueger was made from the outset to be something completely different.
Yeah.
You can't just like take the same character, tack on a different theme, and have it work.
Yeah, that's a great point.
That's what you said about like Alien, the Marines.
Yeah, Colonial Marines.
Yeah, Colonial
trying
Marines.
to do a different feel for something that was not working that way.
Right.
That's a great point.
Alien's supposed to be lurking and sort of quiet.
Yeah.
The movie's very quiet.
Oh, yeah.
It's not a loud sort of military setting.
That's why I never enjoyed. I mean, I know people consider it really good, but the Aliens with James Cameron, the one that he recast it as an action movie, basically, where there's thousands of aliens and they all, it's a big thing, which I never thought made as much sense for that particular creature design as the horror element did, basically. But anyway, so Freddy Krueger, like I said, basically just a silhouette, a way to be instantly recognizable, a way to immediately associate something with something scary. It's unique, right? And immediately, and even in the shots, a lot of the times when the kids have the nightmares in the boiler room, it's poorly lit, and you just see it's backlit, and it's just you see his silhouette, and that's pretty much it. So that one, and like I said, that one works pretty simply. Want to talk about Slender?
Yeah, so Slender was interesting. Again, probably one of the more tame ones, but just he's for those of you who don't know, he's this very wiry figure with a blank face.
Very slender.
Yes, as the name suggests. And the idea is that you go into a forest and he could be hiding behind a tree, but you wouldn't know because he's so slender, right? So he could be hiding anywhere, and he's very stealthy and very quick. But if you take a good look at, you can Google Slender Man, you see lots of pictures. But if you take a good look at Slender Man, he basically looks like a tree, right? Like, and that's what he's hiding, and so it makes sense. But like, if you think about a creature that embodies the fear of being in the woods at night, which probably ties back to the unknown, the fear of the unknown, fear of isolation,
probably a very predatory, like a prey response.
Yeah.
Like an evolutionary sense of being in a place with a bunch of hiding spaces is scary.
Yeah.
Because it could be a predator.
There's, the sense of powerlessness that obviously kind of, again, ties into isolation. But, like, so there's lots of things about scary. If you were just in the woods by yourself alone at night, you would feel scared even without Slender Man.
Yep.
But Slender Man is made specifically to augment and symbolize all the things you might be afraid of. So he's a faceless predator. He moves silently and quickly.
Always watching.
Yeah, he's always exactly.
Always
he only moves when you're not looking at him.
I like the idea that they're like this frustrated copy or the creepypasta writer had tried like Tree Man for like months, and no one was responding. And he's like, all the themes are here, man. Like I don't get. It was the same character, just like a tree, and like no one thought it was scary. And he's like, dude, this is a good idea. I know it's a good idea. And he just believed himself enough. And he's like, all right, how if I just make it a dude with all the same stuff, like man tree, but like I don't know, call him slender. And then that blew up into like the most most popular copypasta or horror or creepypasta ever. That is my new headcanon for Slenderman.
How that happened?
Yeah, that is just the thousands of pages of tree man horror that were written.
Right.
They're horribly ineffective. But no, that's a great point. And like we were talking, like how just as a thought experiment, I'm not entirely convinced it wouldn't. I think there's something just scary about a faceless man in a tuxedo that's going to reach out and grab you. That's more just a thing. But the reason that he was always conveyed in the woods and that he works the best in the woods, like how scary would Slender Man be in a different climate?
Right.
Like Arctic Slender Man.
On the mountains or something.
Yeah, mountain Slender Man. Or
where there's no trees or anything.
Desert Slender Man, where you can... Like, there's no possible way for that one to work, right? He's just there, there's just a scary figure in the desert, I guess, at that point. He doesn't augment the...
Yeah, it doesn't seem very sustainable, right?
Yeah,
like, if you ran into Slender Man in the desert, like... Okay, well, is he going to...
Keep an eye on him and you keep on moving away.
Is he going to kill me? Like, what is he even doing?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, if he wanted to kill me, he should definitely just do it, because I can see him, and he can see me, so,
totally.
This is it.
Or, like, yeah.
In the woods, it's more like, is he, like... He's, like, following me around, and, like, is he behind this tree? No, he's not behind that tree. Oh, he's behind me right now.
And that was the thing that most of the media that I've seen, both the original creepypastas, the pictures, even the game Slender that we've talked about on cast before, very rarely does actually go into what he does when he gets you. Right? There's no elongated death scene like there is in Dead Space where you get killed by the zombies and there's this evisceration that happens. It's not about that. It's about all the lead up and the horror of having something, knowing that there's this strange thing watching you and in the background. It never goes into what happens when he gets you because that's not the point.
Right.
So hence that core horror, which is being him there but hidden, works best in trees. It works best in a place where there's all these things that look a little bit like him and it'd be hard to discern. There's a classic moment, right, in the Day 9 playthrough.
Oh, yeah.
You remember this? Where he's
is
like,
it him?
Is it him? Goes up into a dog whistle octave. But anyway, that being the point of it. So again, I think there's that level of the design really meshing well with the core, what the horror is going for. Yeah. And that's a I love the Slender Man just as a study of folktale and culture, that being the first. He entirely was invented on the internet. There was no level of, there's no other piece of media that he came from. It was a completely 100% original creation.
Right.
That caught on to full, it's a full cultural status.
Yeah.
In the same way like
Bigfoot and the Loch Ness
exactly.
Monster. Yeah.
Of any kind of folk creature. Vampires.
Well, speaking of continuing the theme here of creatures that are designed to symbolize well, you want to talk about Godzilla?
Sure, yeah, let's talk about Godzilla. I'm laughing at our notes with home invasion. And just
yeah,
we'll get there. In that case, I'll briefly talk. We didn't talk about too much about this, but the new Halloween movie came out. It's almost Halloween. Apparently, it's very good. I haven't seen it. But Michael Myers, kind of the original slasher film. It was very much about the slasher genre. It was about kind of suburbia being penetrated and attacked and violated. And in the case of Michael Myers, before we even have the really unique kind of hockey mask of Jason, well, that was less suburbia, but still suburban ideas getting attacked.
Yeah.
Or Freddy Krueger being this really oddly specific design. You have Michael Myers, which is a big dude with a mask on, and the mask is featureless.
Right.
There's nothing to it. It just looks kind of like a burn victim. I mean, it's scary.
Right.
But it's just a dude with a knife and a completely featureless face. And that was again, that's just a nice, easy way to, the kind of the purest form of that concept, which is a completely unknowable, unstoppable force entering into what we thought was the safe space, which is the suburban home.
Right.
And that by itself was scary. And then obviously you have all the things that happen, but that idea is what kept on getting hammered home, and is usually written about with why the slasher movies were effective at the time.
Right.
Was that was the first time we'd seen kind of the homestead get attacked. And like with Michael Myers is the simplest form of that. There's very little character, zero character to him actually.
Yeah.
In terms of
development,
who he is, why he is. He's just this nameless, literally faceless force. So that's why that's a brief take on that particular intersection of the monster design with what it need to be.
And you think about like the underlying message there, right? Is like you can't make yourself safe.
Yeah.
Right. Like you, not even in your own home, in your own bed.
Yep.
Like for Freddy Krueger, it would be like even while you're sleeping,
Yeah.
you're not safe. You can't protect yourself.
Yeah.
And like that's terrifying. Right? We like to know that like if we need to, we can go somewhere where we're going to be okay.
Yeah, and that's very much what the suburbs represented from the city, right? That was the idea of having built this nice little pristine, cordoned off place where kind of the world wasn't as bad as it was everywhere else.
Right.
So now we're going to come in and mess that up.
Right.
And now what?
Well, and it makes sense why that would resonate so much with audiences, is because the people who moved out to the suburbs, not just the people who were born there, but the people who made the conscious choice to leave the city and move to the suburbs, that's exactly the sort of thing they were trying to get away from, right?
Yeah.
Like home invasion, too much other people, thugs, muggings, all of that, they left in the city. Now move out to the suburb and like, oh, well,
guess
Michael Myers is at your door.
Yep. Guess what? So, anyway, that was I was mostly laughing at our notes just to read home invasion and penetrate.
Well... There's only so much you can do and take notes.
Hey, I got it across. Anyway, Godzilla. Yeah, in terms of...
I didn't know what you're about to tell us about Godzilla. I did not know. I grew up watching Godzilla. I had a friend who was extremely into Godzilla. I've never met anyone in my whole life from that point on who was as into Godzilla as he was. But I grew up with an appreciation and with a couple trading cards that reference Godzilla. So please tell us about Godzilla.
I mean, this is hearsay in terms of the veracity of this particular statement. It's an internet fact. But it seems rather believable. Particularly, one thing that is true is that Godzilla was very much a metaphor for the national trauma of the atomic bombs being dropped on Japan.
Right.
Very much a force of nature coming out of nowhere. And it's interesting that we could do a whole Godzilla podcast, man. It's a fascinating to watch how the movies and the way Godzilla was portrayed changed over time, even in Japanese cinema, and then when Americans took it over, and like why Japanese audiences didn't like the American version because it completely missed the point. Anyway, at the beginning, Godzilla was not a good guy at all. He is this primal force of nature that comes out of nowhere and annihilates cities, right? And so again, a big part of horror can be the unknowable and being able to systemize and put that into something knowable, like a big creature that stomps around, is helpful in terms of processing. The fact I think Mark is alluding to is the idea that even in terms of his design, he was that his skin texture was meant to in some places mirror the some of the boils and burnt skin of Hiroshima survivors or the atomic bomb survivors, either in Hiroshima or Nagasaki. That it was an even more direct parallel where it literally made Godzilla have the skin of atomic bomb survivors,
right?
To drive home that entire point of that horror. And it's so funny to watch nowadays. Certainly the old ones would not invoke fear in me.
Right.
But obviously at the time they were hugely popular and hugely successful, and I think very thrilling and probably had a level of terrifyingness in it.
Yeah, it's clear that like that's something that would resonate with the Japanese public.
Yeah.
And like it's interesting even in the monster design. I realize that's that sounds plausible.
Yeah. It fits with, like I said, thematically what Godzilla was supposed to be.
Right. But it's funny because, well, it's interesting to think about how it's on the other side of things, right? Like, you're taking something from a victim and putting it on the monster.
What's he supposed to represent, the bomb or the victim?
Exactly. Yeah. And so, like, and the victims are obviously, something we wouldn't be afraid of. The bomb clearly is. But because the monster's job is really to symbolize the whole experience and to cause that to resonate in the audience, you actually can pull from everything
associated with the event,
which includes tall buildings, and probably people screaming and fire and all of this that is really wrapped up into Godzilla and the Godzilla movies.
Absolutely.
And so it isn't just about like take the dangerous parts.
Yeah,
of it,
sure.
or
That's a good.
It's you can pick anything that's sort of part of the event you're trying to reference or the experience you're trying to reference.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great point. In terms of if the goal of that movie was just a way to process and experience the bomb in a way that, I mean, obviously it wasn't an actual bomb, it was rather in media, then every piece of that experience goes into that, not just the
scary
the destruction
parts.
Part. Right, yeah, no, that's a great point. Then in this case, the goal isn't, and that's an interesting case too, in that I don't think it was marketed as a horror movie. I think it was supposed to be it was that was kind of a new genre, like the disaster movie hadn't really happened yet in large part, so it kind of helped pave that way, but it wasn't, a straight horror film. No. So that makes sense that the monster itself wasn't just the bad, evil parts of it. It was kind of the totality of the experience. So that might just be a broader creature design thing that we're applying to horror here. But yeah, in terms of what you want to communicate with what you're doing, I mean, I'm thinking of, I know we bring this up a lot, but Shadow of the Colossus does a great job at communicating a lot of sadness when you kill these things. There's very little like malevolence in the creatures when you kill them. They are very much they feel ancient, they feel old, they feel in some cases scared or confused. They very much communicate a bunch of things which the game is trying to instill in you, which is like, basically destroying beautiful things for the sake of yourself.
Right.
And that all of that experience of that comes together in those creatures. And obviously there's different creatures, so there's different veins of that emotion.
Yeah, that would be an interesting case study to go through each one.
Yeah. But anyway, so that's a really good point, Mark, in terms of the totality of that experience being represented in the creature as opposed to just the one aspect of that experience, which was destruction.
Right.
So that's a cool point. And I think too that's the thing, like I said, as the movies went away from, in the Cold War, they became, in short, Godzilla became like a symbol of Japan as a nation fighting against the West at that point. And kind of, or American nationalism or imperialism, trying to kind of, capitalize on a lot of stuff that had happened after World War II. Yeah. So now Godzilla is no longer this creature of fear. He's more heroic Japanese ideal, and you can see the design change in regards to that too, where he looks less burnt and a little bit more heroic in the way he is portrayed.
He was defending Japan from other monsters,
from other creatures,
right, like was Space Godzilla or
Mechagodzilla, Mothra. In other news, I'm really, really excited for the new Godzilla movie. I showed you the trailer for that, didn't you?
You showed me the trailer for it. I have no plans to see it yet, but you might.
I don't even know when it's coming out. I think it's next summer.
Next summer.
In any case, that just got me hyped again for it.
So, do you want to talk about? Let's take a pause for a second and think about monsters in video games. I feel like I'd be remiss if, and this isn't in our notes, but if we didn't talk about the Butcher.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Like, what do you think it is about the Butcher that really captures this idea of going down into this dungeon?
That's a good idea. And that's something we've talked about so much with Diablo 3 was often the criticism being that it eliminated a lot of its horror elements.
Right.
And why, particularly one of the easiest comparisons was the original Diablo Butcher experience versus the Diablo 3 Butcher. I remember seeing one video that, the original Butcher, there's zero fanfare about him appearing other than the fresh meat line, and then you immediately get set upon and killed. As opposed to, there's a opening cutscene with the new Butcher where he comes out and there's like fire that like is lining the arena, and it feels like a WWE intro for him, where he like roars and like hits it, and then like pyrotechnics go off, and it's like scary music, and it's like.
Where's the John Cena theme?
Basically, kind of, yeah. So that's a great point in terms of what did the original Butcher capture about the fear of delving down deep into. I think the cool thing about that, and I forget if we've talked about this before, but was he was originally going to be a N-tier boss.
Right?
Yeah. And I forget, I think maybe just had the idea, or if there was a glitch or something, but...
I think it was a glitch.
Was it? And they put him in an early level?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they liked it.
Yeah, and they were just like, that's insane. This immediate overpowering. I think it's the thing that we talked about with Diablo 3 that cut down on a lot of the horror was the insane level of empowerment that you get in terms of just murdering pretty much everything, and that's such a cool feeling. That being said, that is exactly what I think they avoided with the original one,
right? With
the Butcher, where you are kind of slowly powering up, and you're beginning to overcome these creatures, and then suddenly you are entirely stripped of your power. You are completely overmatched,
right?
And you have no choices in this action game but to run now, basically.
Yeah, which is that's a real paradigm shift from what you had been doing, like hacking and slashing your way through hordes of skeletons.
Yep.
Like especially if at this point, by the time you get down to the Butcher, you might be kind of desensitized to the weaker enemies, and then to sort of be put into your place by this like creature from out of nowhere in this dark room who's talking about meat.
Yeah, exactly. So that's mostly the abstract version. Let's think about the design itself that was scary. I don't know. I think he was, again, that's early on in the game, and it's mostly just skeletons at that point. Mm-hmm. It's mostly this gothic kind of Victorian skeleton dungeon, very dark kind of D&D-esque early, fantasy, dark fantasy sort of thing. And then suddenly you have the Butcher, which is like full-on like Texas Chainsaw Massacre horror.
Yeah.
It's a quick aesthetic change, I think, where you went from this kind of dry, sterile kind of sequence of events, and then suddenly you have this one room that just has corpses and meat hung up, and then obviously just that one line, fresh meat, being so viscerally disturbing.
Yeah.
And then another thing that people very often talk about is the sound effects of when you die, he keeps on chopping at you, right? Wow. You keep on hearing the chopping noise.
Wow.
Which is disturbing by itself.
I don't remember that.
Yeah. That
does sound terrible.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds horrifying just describing it. So I think that could be a part of it. Because that's an interesting one, right? We just talked about how a lot of times you want to focus into that core fantasy of the fear that's happening, but in this case, it was very much a juxtaposition.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm trying to think about.
Wrap your mind around.
Why a butcher?
Specifically,
could have been like a big skeleton,
right?
But I think maybe at that point you've been desensitized to sort of the dungeon
to skeletons or dead things. It wasn't a dead thing. It was very much a live thing. It was very much a normal, again, a twisted version of normalcy, right? Butchers are a thing, and they're real.
Right.
It's also interesting in terms of, the level of most of the stuff that you're fighting is dead, and now you're dealing with something that deals in kind of death by itself, right? Like the butchering of meat and killing things. That lines up decently. Now you're not dealing with the after effects, but the thing that causes them to be dead in the first place. The butcher itself.
Right.
And also in terms of, monster design's interesting with Diablo, because at that point, it was isometric 2D. Mm-hmm. So there actually wasn't a whole frick ton of detail they could even put in. And for all the things that Diablo is praised for, the original game and Diablo 2, I don't know how often monster design is brought up. It probably is. I feel like it's a lot more, when people think about it, they don't say, God, the monster design was so much better back then. If anything, I think the monster design was way more creative in 3.
Right.
I would say the ambiance, the soundtrack, the power scaling, the plot, the pervasive-ness of the dungeon itself. There's one dungeon, you just keep on going down and down. Right. It's a cool idea. At the bottom, the devil, literally, and you're in hell.
Yeah.
Simple idea as opposed to kind of this long, overarching fantasy plot that Diablo 3 tried to do. So, in any case, I think the Butcher, in that case, when you don't have... that just kind of reinforces the idea that when you have less visuals, it is more about the ideas and abstract horror that makes it work.
Which I would say in this case, the idea is that you could just be overpowered in this dungeon, and no one's going to help you.
Yeah.
This game isn't going to pull any punches.
Yeah, no, very much so. Also, there's a level of unpredictability where, they don't do that again.
Right.
Where suddenly something comes out of nowhere that's stronger than you. But
you don't know that.
Better guarantee that the people who are playing through that game probably assume that was going to happen each and every time.
Right.
You went down a level, so every time you go deeper, you're also feeling more scared, which is what they intended too. Mm-hmm. So that works well.
Yeah.
In terms of a lineup, a convergence. Convergence. God, I've been looking for that word all cast. I haven't been able to use it. I keep on motioning with my hands and looking for a word, but I couldn't find it.
So, moving back into, I guess, just more general media, you talked about Super 8, and this is an aspect of horror that we haven't touched on or mentioned so far. And Babadook actually also touches on this theme. You want to talk about those?
Yes, I could talk about these at length. I don't know if it's Babadook or Babadook. It's definitely Duke. That's easy enough to pronounce. Yeah, that references an Australian horror movie that I think might have been released specifically on Netflix. I don't know. I saw it on Netflix. Probably not. Anyway, point is, Super 8 is a movie by J.J. Abrams, and Babadook is also, like I said, that's an indie Australian horror movie, which is really good. And both of these focus, when we were talking about earlier, kind of the key kind of thing that a lot of horror has to draw on. In this case, these two movies are actually about grief at core. They're both pretty I'd say the Babadook is probably a little bit more, certainly more straight horror, and probably a little bit harder to get at in terms of what it's really about. You can watch that as a pretty straight horror movie, and it's still scary, I think.
Yeah. Super 8 is much clearer about its message.
Yeah, it's a lot more upfront in terms of what it's going for. But even then, I think there's people that I think you can also just watch that as a fine thriller movie, kind of a Jurassic Park-ish kind of monster flick. But spoilers for these two movies, I suppose. They both deal with a previous trauma that has happened before the movie starts. It's basically identical. I mean, they're both deaths, right? Super 8 has the main character's mother die at a very young age. And in the Babadook, the father is passed away and the mother is left. So both of them are basically the monster in this case. It's a lost and scared alien in Super 8, and Babadook is a kind of formless, dark thing, grief embodied, skittering and very kind of it takes the form of an evil book at first. That's scary. But in any case, the design of these works really well. The one I love about Super 8 that I don't think a lot of people probably know, but there's a scene, again, major spoilers for the movie. Please watch it if you haven't. Turn off the podcast and skip ahead. But there's kind of the core moment of the movie is this boy who has been not being able to deal with his mother's death in large part, that was very tragic, is finally confronted by the monster. The monster gets him. The monster, by the way, is like his grief. It literally lives underground. It tunnels. It lives near a graveyard. All this jazz. But the moment it finally captures him and it shows him what happened to it, the alien, and it crashed here on Earth and was captured by scientists and tortured and tested on, and was in large part just scared. That's why it was so violent. And he sees all this. The monster shows him all this right before it's about to eat him, I guess. And the boy basically has a line that, like, it's this very artful, beautiful moment where he tells it that, he comes to terms with his own grief, which is like, yeah, bad things happen, and you don't have to lash out though. Like, you can keep on living. Mm-hmm. Like, just because bad things have happened doesn't mean that they're always going to happen, and you can make a choice to move on. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, the creature, who you've seen pretty sparsely, but at this point has kind of these black, dead, big shark eyes. And it has eyelids too. It's like can open and close its eyes. But then you see another layer, kind of like a reptilian, third eyelid peel back, mm-hmm. and those dark shark eyes turn into big, huge, human pupilled eyes. And in fact, for the movie, they took the woman who played the boy's mother in the movie, and those are literally that actress's eyes put onto the creature. Mm-hmm. So it's him encountering his own grief in the form of his dead mom. The Babadook is very, very similar in terms of personifying. In short, thematically, it's don't let it in. Mm-hmm. If it gets in, the more you fight it, the harder it's gonna fight to get in, and the more you fight it, the stronger it becomes, basically. Right. Until she spends this whole movie trying to box this thing out, which is the grief of her dead husband and the difficulty of raising a son alone. And then she finally confronts it at the very end, and claims love over her son, and it is entirely powerless. And it ends actually with the Babadook they can't kill it; it just lives in the basement. Right, and they feed it. They feed it like worms and like dirt.
Oh my gosh!
But it's entirely like it ends with the boy asking, she goes to the basement, puts a plate down, and the shadow grabs it and pulls it back, and you hear this eating sound. And she goes upstairs, and the last line of the movie is the boy asking his mom how is it today, and she's like, it's all right, it's still there. But it's it's living in the basement now, and they know how to take care of it.
That gives me chills.
It's so good. It's so good. Anyway, the point is, the design of those two, the moment with the eyes in Super 8 is a super straightforward one, which I love, but the Babadook also works really well in terms of it being this formless, massless shadow for the entirety of the movie, until it's confronted directly and takes the form of a man, basically. Mm-hmm. In fact, it actually appears as the boy's father, literally at one point. Yeah. In the basement. So those are just straight up metaphor movies that definitely play into their sense of grief and how to deal with trauma.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the themes, of course, there are like the really primal themes like loud noises and snakes, but a lot of the themes they get tied into here are very emotional and very subjective themes.
Yeah.
Which I think is so interesting that like I guess I never thought of horror media as having much heart.
Yeah.
But it actually tends to have a lot of heart because it is tied so deeply to the subjective experience of its audience and of the people in the audience.
I agree entirely, and that's actually why I found a love for horror the way I did. I think was no accident. The first kind of piece of horror I really fell in love with was It, which is it's actually that's about childhood trauma too. Shocker, spoiler. At core, I've termed my favorite horror to be like a very very select, tiny, narrow. Because there's a bunch of like the slasher movies or like there's a bunch of kind of very hopeless, gross feeling horror, like I don't know, like Insidious or Sinister, or kind of a lot of the demonic stuff tends to end on a pretty down note. But there's like this tiny little strip of horror that has like heart to it, or that has a really powerful theme attached to it, where horrible things happen. Doesn't even, I think I prefer a happy ending, but doesn't even need to have a happy ending. There's a really great horror movie called frick, I always forget the name. It's like it's Session 9 is what it's called. Go look. That's just a meditation on like insanity, basically, and identity that does not end well, but is really deeply moving and like beautiful in its own way. So yeah, I have a very small strip of horror that I really deeply enjoy that has some, and I think like you said, it's a really it's leans in that direction, right? It kind of has to.
Yeah.
In terms of if it's going to be effective in scaring you, it's got to be outside of kind of maybe some of the just shock value of certain horror. It's got to be able to touch, and for me, that's the stuff that is really deep. Like The Babadook. Most of my friends who love horror don't think that movie is very scary. I have to like batten down the hatches to watch that movie because it's such a wonderful rendition of trauma and grief that I can relate to on a level, and that's deep. That's way more unsettling for me to watch than any of the slashers. Or I mean, even the Blair Witch Project is another. That's an incredible. The horror inherent in that movie is all about isolation and aloneness and fear, and it's a very human thing. As opposed to literally, I mean that movie literally nothing happens, right? There's like no horror element to it.
Yeah,
that's part of the beauty of it.
Right.
But again, I would very much sooner watch Halloween or even one of the crappier Saw movies than put myself through Blair Witch again.
Well, I think we are going to end early tonight. Cut this a little short so we can hop on the stream. Hopefully we'll see you guys on there. We realize that I'm talking to people who've already watched the stream at this point. But anyway, enjoy Little Nightmares. We hope you enjoyed this meditation on creatures in horror movies and otherwise. And this is, well, let's see, we do have one more episode this month. All right, we've got one more for you guys. So... it's the Spooktober is not over yet. We'll probably have some good stuff come out of the stream. But we will see you next week.
Bye-bye.